We are live. Hello, everyone. We'll wait for 5 more minutes, so we'll let everybody join and then we'll start. Okay. Good evening, Avi. We'll wait for 5 more minutes, so we'll let everybody join and then we'll start. Okay. Good evening, Avi. Good evening, Vishesh. Hey, Vinu. How are you today? Guys, we'll wait for 5 more minutes so that everybody joins in and then we'll start the session. Good to hear that, Vinu. Good evening, Vivekananda, if I'm pronouncing it right.
Good evening, Siva Krishna. So we're waiting for like another 2 minutes so that everybody would join in and then we'll start. Till that time, you can tell me where are you joining from? What location are you joining from? And how are you doing today?
Hi, good evening, Arwa, and good evening, Dr. Nivedita, and everybody who has joined and still pouring in. So I'm Dr. Prachi. I'm a professor at Full School of Management, and I've joined it from Delhi. Looking forward to this interaction today.
Yeah, yeah. Same here. Okay, so let's start for today. Hello, everyone. A very good evening to you all. Thank you for joining in. The topic for today's discussion is core competencies in the hiring process. Hi, I am Arva Bombewala. I am the founder and CEO of Word Digital. We run a digital marketing consultancy, a B2B digital marketing consultancy. I have been associated with Nine Links for the digital marketing efforts. I'm joining here from Pune. Say a hi in the chat box and let me know which locations have you joined from. Would love to know. Hi Harshita. Hi Anuj. So here with us today are Dr. Prachi Bhatt, a professor at Ford School of Management, and Dr. Nivedita Srivastava, the founder of Nine Links, a leading psychometric assessment company. I would like to take them some time and introduce themselves.
So you want me to
Yeah,
go first?
Nivedita. Yes,
Or,
Prachi. Go ahead.
why not Nivedita, please?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Sarva, for that lovely introduction and hosting the show or the LinkedIn Live for us. And hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Nivedita Srivastav, and as Arva introduced, I'm the founder of Nine Lakes. And I'm doing this LinkedIn Live from Ahmedabad. That's where we are headquartered at. And yes, over to you, Dr. Prachi. So, more about Nine Links as we speak, and more about Prachi as we speak. Sure.
Yeah, so very briefly, I'm a professor in the area of OBHR at Ford School of Management, New Delhi. And I have been working in this particular area domain on competency mapping, competency-based management practices for quite some time now. Both in terms of research and bits of consulting as well. And yeah, we'll talk about more about competency as we go ahead in this particular session, I think.
Sure. Definitely. Yeah, I would love to hear you guys. Guys, we'll take all the question answers at the end of the session. So I'll let Nivedita and Prachi take over the stage and start the conversation around.
Sure. Thank you, Eva, for that. And I'm sure this is going to be a very insightful and a very deep dive into this whole concept of competency based discovering competency based assessments and the relevance in the current times when one researcher connects with another researcher. The reason why we have invited Dr. Prachi Bhatt as a first speaker, as a first guest on this LinkedIn Live in this series that we are going to delve more into is primarily because of the reason that the three pillars of Nine Links are primarily research, academia, and the corporate. So that's where the linkage between these three sectors come in, and we could not think of anybody else other than Professor Prachi Bhatt as one of the speakers coming in with a blend or a correct blend of research and academia with her in this space. So yeah, so we are happy to have Prachi out here. And yes, I think if Prachi, if you're ready for this round of interaction that we have, it would be more of an interaction based, where we would have certain basic, and certain specific questions. And yes, of course, as we just, as Arva just mentioned, that the questions from the viewers, we would take them at the end of the after our discussion that we have, the
Discussion.
interaction that we have out here, right? So, starting from basics, Prachi, one question that comes to my mind, and I'm sure many of our guests would also have this on their minds, that skills and competencies are often used interchangeably, right? So, is that in a way correct? Can they be used interchangeably, or you think there's a thin line that divides the two concepts? What is your opinion on that? Let's maybe just start from that.
Yeah, very good question to start with. And so, yeah, when we talk about skills and competency, you rightly put that generally used synonymously many a times, so that both are same. So let me start with the element which makes these two more similar. However, they are different in more than one ways. But that similarity, why people draw the similarity in both of these terms, skills and competencies, essentially, these both skill and competency are acquired ability to by an individual to do a particular job, a task, right? And this are acquired, could be acquired through training or experience of a person. So that is in terms of acquiring these abilities by an individual. They're kind of, if we say, are similar. However, these two are very different conceptually as well as operationally, because this understanding of what skills are and what competencies impact the way they are used. So this is a very, that's why I said it's a very important question to understand the difference between the two. So when we talk about skills, these are more learned abilities by a person to do a job successfully, if I could put it this way, right? So it's an acquired ability by a person through experience, through training. However, competency is not just skills. It's also about the knowledge a person has and the kind of behaviors that the skill get translated into. So, if I rephrase myself, I would say that competency is a combination of knowledge, skills, and abilities. And there is another other factor that come into picture. But as of now, so just to identify, to understand the difference between the two, so this is competency is a superset which encompasses skill as one of its elements. So that is what it is. And another way how it could be understood as these two are different is skills are more like what part of it, like what am I supposed to do, what is exactly am I supposed to do for to be successful in this particular job. But competencies also talk about inclusive of what, it also talks about how, right? So it is inclusive of both what and how, that completes the whole performance. And that's why we say that skill is to do a job successfully. However, somebody who's competent would, it would mean that somebody who's competent is how a person can be or is competent to be successful in a job rather than doing a job successfully, if you know what I mean here, right? So doing a job successfully and being successful in a job. So that kind of differentiates what skill and competencies are. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's similar to what, how efficiency and effectiveness could also be looked at. So I guess if I'm not wrong, it could be looked at similarly in the similar pattern, right? How
Hmm.
thin the differences between efficiency and effectiveness, right? How you do a job efficiently and how you do it effectively, right? Okay,
Effectively.
great. I
Yeah.
think very wonderfully put and very aptly put. I think the most in the most crisp fashion that anybody could have. I'm sure on that. Right. Moving on, Prachi. The next question that I had was that while it's been a few decades that the HR, or maybe a couple of more, maybe, but yes, the industry has evolved with their HR practices, right? So when we say that, has how has the scenario of assessments progressed in the Indian industries? A lot of these concepts have been adapted by the Western world, right? I think we are still in a stage of evolving and adapting to these processes, the HR processes, which are well established in the Western world, right? So, you think it is particularly relevant for a particular sector to talk about competencies and skills, or does it apply to all the sectors? How do you think? Is there any specific sector that you define that, okay, competency based assessments are more relevant to a particular sector vis-a-vis other sectors? Do you think so, or how do you think so? What do you say?
Yeah. I hear two parts in this this question of yours. This is one, how the assessment has maybe progressed in the Indian setup. All right, that's one, and next is the applicability of the competency based approach. Am I right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
When we talk about in the uh, about competencies have always been there. However, just this nomenclature of the way we assess people, that the way we look at that, that has become more evolved. So now we talk about not just skills as a basic skill sets or people require, or about job requirements, but also in terms of the other knowledge, abilities, and behaviors that people engage in. So it has certainly progressed over a period of time. However, I still find it is limited to certain job profiles also, right? So what I mean is that there is a lot of catching up to do as far as competency focused assessment is being done in the Indian setup. It is also has, like, we there are multiple factors that come into picture in terms of the infrastructure, in the time, effort, money that an organization invests in this particular approach of assessment, because it is very impactful, certainly, but it requires a lot of background work as well in order to become more effective. And that is where what I found is, this is my experience in terms of some of the companies who have reached out to um, um, implement some element of competency based HR practices. What I've found and seen is that it is like more um, not thoroughly planned, but it's an very impactful approach. So hence they want to adopt it without a proper process of adaptation of competency based approach. So it is, yes, limited to some extent in terms of certain sectors, also in terms of certain job profiles where it has been used. So however, we are incorporating these the elements of competency assessments. Having said that, when we say that organizations are Indian setups are using competency based assessments, yes, they are. If you see pretty much every job profile that we see in, like, if I talk about MBA institutes or other institutes in general, so where there you would find these elements of competency. So all those job profiles do entail these elements of competencies which are being used for assessment by the company. So it is being used. How well, to what extent, that is still need to be. We need to be more careful with respect to, are they effective in assessing them? Not completely sure, because as I said a few minutes ago, that operationalization of competencies is also important, and there is the um, place where I find quite a few Indian organizations, Indian setups are also a lot of catching up to do there, effective operationalization. So, but yeah, we will be reaching there, and as you said, that changing environment. So we are changing the way we assess competencies, or where we assess individuals at a workplace. So,
Sure.
and the next question was around sector, was it?
Yeah,
application of.
similar thing wherein, yes, how has it become so relevant now? Do you think it applies to? I think you just answered that. Yes, I think, yeah.
Hmm. So it has, when we say, when we talk about such a disruptive environment, we talk about disruptive environment quite often these days. But yeah, it's a fact that it's a uh, new normal emerging in pretty much every function of an organization, right? And we need to recalibrate the way we approach assessment of people, or before even assessment of people or using assessment techniques for certain purpose. It's also important that have we identified the right expectations given the disruptive environment. And here is where I think competencies play a very stable role. So things around in the organizations are changing to a great extent. The degree and the magnitude would vary, and the scope would vary too, the change with which we are changing. However, it has now, or we have evolved into getting this competency as a staple to an organization that helps us to identify the real deal breakers.
Sure.
And so, what I'm trying to say is also that if the change is changing, so should change the parameters which we use to assess people. But if those parameters change very often, so what next? So here is again competencies play a very important role. That you look for those real deal breakers, which, irrespective of the changing environment, we are looking for those deal breakers, and we assess people using those deal breakers. So yeah, so that's why changing expectations, um, and with the changing expectations, we need to also to recalibrate the way we assess or use assessment tools and techniques.
Okay. Sure. And also, taking it forward from here, Prachi. So while so now that we have spoken quite a quite a lot in terms of what competency-based assessments are, right? Or
Mm.
rather, what competencies are, right? So I would also want to know, and I'm sure the viewers too would want to know, that how do we differentiate between uh, generic competency based assessments, right? So when we say generic competencies, I'm sure they mean that, that they typically apply to. So then how do we differentiate between generic competency assessments and focused competency based assessments? So do you think it's just a step up, or is it way beyond that? So how would you want to, maybe you could throw some insights on that as well.
Yeah, so it is certainly a step up when you talk about generic assessments, because I would consider them as like more traditional way. However, nothing wrong with that, but if done with a purpose, So, and when I say purpose, competency focused assessments help us to address that purpose. Uh, when I say that if we hire a right person at the right job in an organization, uh, at this level, I'm not talking about any particular management level at which competency assessments are used, but just for an example's sake. So if I make a good hire in an organization, a person job fit, person environment fit, keeping in mind competency focused assessments, it is more likely to contribute to the business of an organization. How? Here comes a right hiring done. This right hire candidate adds value to the organization in a manner which it is supposed to. Rather than we hire somebody, you are supposed to do XYZ, and I'm not sure whether or not this behavior leads to or contributes to the organization. But when we talk about competency based approach, this is very important to understand that why it is different from just such generic assessments is because competency based assessments are more focused, they're more purposeful. So there's a purpose behind. So, like, what am I looking for? I know that. And from that, I deduce that these are the competencies that I need to look that I'm looking for in a candidate, in a person. So, talking about hiring is an example, probably this is what I'm taking here.
Right.
So, it's more evidence based. It is linked with the organization's capabilities and contributing to organization. That is what we refer to as core competencies. Arva initially identified the core competencies of an organization or core competencies of an individual. So that is where competency-based approach targets. It is very purposeful. It's not. It's a sort of. It does not talk about tasks only. So it also talks about the people, the job incumbent who's supposed to do the job. So who's the right fit, and we are not focused only on the task but also on the people and their competencies that helps them to fulfill the expectations in a particular task. I Yeah.
Yeah. So would it be correct to say that maybe there could be three ways in dealing with competency focused competency based assessments? If please you could add more to that. Just something that I thought I could uh, get more insights from you on that. So maybe if we really have to look into that, so do you think, as you just mentioned, that more purposeful? So besides the function of a particular role, right, the job incumbent, the job holder, and the level that we're talking about, it is also imperative to take into account the organization culture, right? So maybe do you think these three could be a base for when we really have to deal into or look at focused competency based assessments? Do you think
Sure.
these three are valid enough pillars to talk about focused competency based assessments?
Completely. So if I could make it more generic than environment, so it's culture. So I think that the context, the environment overall, that also encompasses culture, plays a very important role. And
Right.
not many assessments are able to understand or could deconstitute a competency into operationalized behaviors, but competency does that. So when you are expecting a certain value system in an organization, because you mentioned about culture. So here we are talking about certain behaviors which are so critical that sets the expectation in terms of the or that also helps us to identify that person environment fit or the person value fit in the organization. And competency is based assessments are able to do that really well. And when I'm saying really well, with like high reliability and validity as a researcher. So that kind of uh, that's the power of competency based
Right.
assessments, focused competency based
Yeah, maybe I
assessments.
could just share, something that we practice internally at Minings as well. So it's a
Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
So I
Please.
often, when we speak within the group of our team members, I often share that that for me maybe as a base of organizational culture, transparency is something that's most important. So
Yeah.
while many of us work remotely, right, we don't get to see each other for months altogether, but we are so well connected to each other that that I think just being in touch with each other, that okay, even if you're stepping out of office, maybe I am and since the team members are transparent to each other, so we are pretty confident that yes, work doesn't suffer even if you're in a different location altogether. So I think transparency is something that's very imperative for the nine links culture. Just speaking about it. So I think yes, as we just discussed, that maybe organization culture is again a very a very strong foundation of focused competency based assessments. That's very beautifully put, right? Okay, so something else that I had on my mind, Prachi, was that competency based assessments, or even even thinking about competency based assessments, or the very focus of focused competencies could be quite an expensive affair. Do you really think it's so expensive? What level of organization should they deal into? Is it something that even medium scale organizations could talk about and could think about, or is only the larger organizations should talk about competency based assessments and start working on those in those domains? Or is it something that even medium and small enterprises could talk about? What is your opinion on that?
Yeah. So uh, the understanding around competency-based approach in management, if I put it this way, in which assessment would be a part of, part of. So here, when we say um, established organizations, or is there a difference between this particular approach being applicable in, or whether or not medium-sized organization is a good idea to go ahead with it, is because it could be an expensive affair, right? But when we talk about the kind of fruit that we'll reap from this approach of competency based assessments, that is immense. That's immense. So when I say that, is it an expensive thing to do, get into a competency based assessment or competency based approach in an organization for a particular function or for all the people operations? I would say it's not that expensive if you engage in the right conceptualization and operationalization of the whole process. It is not expensive in terms of when you say that it's like more money is invested in this. You could still make a very reliable and valid competency models to be used for assessments. So when I'm saying competency models, list of competencies that we are looking for in like for assessments. So the kind of process that we engage in, if that could be done for different could be done at a different scale for different organizations. So when we even this is very applicable, highly applicable in a startup setup as well. Because when you know, then and when you talk about medium-sized organizations as well, I've seen companies using having 3 or 4 or 5 generally. So when we talk about value-based competencies, so starting with value-based competencies by a startup and assessing people basis that, not only assessing but also engaging in practices which is value-based behaviors that a startup would expect, because they do not know actually where would they head like in few years time. However, this competency based models give them a would give a direction to them that this is what we are looking for, and it pretty much drives the functions of an organization, and it makes it even more easier for them to implement. As far as the time and effort is concerned, yes, I would say that it is it's like worth the time and effort spent on identification of right competencies and then assessment of those. So I would not, would not really buy this thing that it's only a process that only established organizations, large organizations would only engage in, or can they afford to engage in competency-based approach. No. There are ways, and only if you know that what would make a better competency model for assessments, what would go into the process of making a reliable and a valid model. On that would depend the value that we can reap from such approach, competency-based approach.
So something that really strikes me out here, that when we talk about the cost of competency-based assessments, so here they may not be very expensive, but they can be extensive, and they definitely demand commitment and dedication from
True.
the core
Yeah.
team. Right? It could not be a
Right.
one-off HR processes which you just launch and it's out of the window, but it definitely requires a long-term commitment and dedication to first
Yeah.
implement the approach, and then also implement the assessments and to follow them as a regular practice in the organization.
Right. So just case in a point here, if I could bring in, without naming the organization. So, um, uh, a really big organization here. So Ready, who has the infrastructure, time, effort, money, everything to bring in competency-based performance management system, right? Um, but when you rightly pointed out that the commitment, right, which is required in order to make this a success, if not there, which wasn't the case where the organization that I'm referring to, a really big and known organization, and was part of the process, and that clarity isn't there, that what do we expect, what do we want out of this particular whole competency based assessment. If that is not there, however we have the money, we have the time to spend to just roll out a competency based assessment, but that is of that goes up, the whole time, effort, money is futile when it does not yield the expected result. And but the problem is that we didn't start with the right commitment and the commitment towards achieving what we really wanted. So that clarity not being there could completely the whole objective would go on the
Goes
toss.
futile. Agree.
Yeah.
Completely right. Okay. So now, Prachi, that we understand that the basics of the what, how, and why of focus competency-based assessments, right? So we do understand what are the basic pillars of focus competency-based assessments. How do we initiate it, right? From understanding the the very purpose of doing that, right? It would also be, I think, very interesting for the viewers that while one of the core purposes of focus competency based assessments stands out to be hiring, right? We generally talk about it in that perspective, because when, let's say, if it's a green field assignment, or it's a brown field, or as you just mentioned, that startups talking about value based value systems in the organization, right? So hiring seems to be the most relevant area where focus competency based assessments could be implied and applied, right? Do you think there are other avenues as well where focused competency based approaches and assessments, when adopted by an organization, these could again step up the HR processes of in an organization? Is there anywhere else where it could be more relevant, and or equally relevant for that matter?
Yeah, um, just beyond hiring as well, competency based assessment is important. So when you're saying getting the right people on board, so yeah, that's where it all starts, right? So right people with right set of competencies, and you hire them. But now what? So the whole process that begins with hiring, and then when we talk about examining the competency strengths and weaknesses of our individuals, and exploring the gaps of groups or individuals that they have. So identification of those gaps in terms of competencies need to be filled. So here comes our learning and development comes into picture. That again has its underpinning. It's basically coming from the competency gaps that we identify. So that training need identification, learning need identification is competency based. Just the way we hire, so we have our set of expectations in terms of degree of competency, and the kind and that focused competency that we are the where competencies we want our people to excel in. So we identify those gaps. That's another beyond hiring. Also, when we talk about competency assessment for performance management and developmental purposes, so we ensure that the employee performance against a set benchmark, whether in their current job or their future career aspirations. So we keep that in mind as well. So these assessments are also very useful for performance management. Again, we move on to our compensation as well. So it could be linked, but when I'm talking about training, performance management, compensation, like such, or any such targeted developmental activities that or for also career progression, all this needs to be uh, based on a reliable and a valid set of competencies. Use competencies and the assessment of these competencies through reliable and valid tools, wherein like you, Nivedita, come in as nine links as well. That is giving them. So when we talk about competencies, now you also need the right tool to assess those competencies, right? So here, when we talk about career progression as well, compensation, identifying the right fit, job redesigning, whatnot. So, and also improving the culture of an organization, if I could put it that way. And also, I'll, this, as I was talking about competency being a staple, organization staple, and leadership level, certainly uh, we need that support from the top in order to roll out a plan like that. So, competency based approach, not just this HR function that I'm referring to, but also this helps a leader um, or a leadership of an organization to have like an eye on the microscope and at the same time another on the telescope, so they understand what we do now, and also competency based approach help you to be more futuristic as well. So in the futures, what do we look for in people, in terms of for hiring, for career progression, for performance management. So that helps overall in the organization in more than one ways than just hiring. But yes, you're right. It's essentially focus more on hiring, but we do not see the whole picture here. Which so it completes the cycle when you say we go beyond
Sure. Right.
just hiring.
Yeah, I think that's very relevant here, Prachi, that while we definitely build the whole, competency model, competency matrix, but the assessment has to be, very standardized and very scientific. It definitely has to have an investment from that perspective as well, wherein all the tools that are being used are standardized and, valid enough to ensure
Yeah.
that while the model, the matrix that is being developed, and those aspirations that we have, of the results or the ROE of the entire exercise has to be in the right direction of, wherein it fetches us the best results. So I think those standardization and those validity of tools, that's very imperative out here, irrespective of whether it's a psychometric test or a case study, or there could be a number of tools for that matter, role play, simulation, so many of them, right? We all know of that, right? There could be multiple tools. Any other tool that you want to talk about besides the one that we spoke?
Tool for competency assessment.
Yes,
So,
yes.
I'm a big fan of behavioral interviewing. So, and along with that, psychometric assessments as well, if done right, because we just can't take it like off the shelf and then use it. They can be really, really informative, especially when we talk about for developmental purposes specifically. Um, so, those psychometric assessments done right, so when we talk about the psychometric assessments as well, we need to understand that the customization of those tests, or if not customized, then we need to so that is something that makes it the psychometric test more reliable and valid, is you make your own tests, or like firms like again Nine Links would come in here when they help organizations to assess what exactly the expectation is, and then designing tools and items around that. So that kind of that as one of the important tool, which if implemented right, could yield the great and right results to be used, to be operationalized later. Otherwise it would be again just another activity that we
Generic
do. So
one. Absolutely,
yeah, yeah.
absolutely, very important.
And then this behavioral interviewing, this is again, it is considered as a very highly reliable, highly valid, because when you say psychometric assessments as well, you make such structures or interview structures as well which are high reliable and valid. They're also tool to assess competencies, right? So they could also be made more reliable and valid set of interview questions that you ask. So it's just not just interview questions, it's a behavioral interviewing, and heavily used across the world, especially if I could say mentioned at a leadership level, certainly. So now imagine if competency-based assessment is done at leadership level across companies, and when I say behavioral interviewing around like all 500 Fortune 500 companies today, they use this competency-based assessment tool, behavioral interviewing. Again, need to be So this assessment tool, that is very reliable, highly reliable and valid tool. And if it is used at a leadership level, imagine what it could do at even at like levels below that if done right. Again, so
Right.
that is important. And when I'm saying when done right, not everybody is an expert in everything. So here Nivedita, you come in wherein as an expert and help organizations to assess what is expected and appropriately you customize those tools
Sure.
assessments for. Yeah. So
Right.
yeah, so these two would be.
Sure. Okay. Okay. So I think one more
I
question that yeah.
So, I know I had a question because I was talking about Nine Links to you. So, also as a practitioner at Nine Links in terms of practitioners of psychometric assessment, right? Uh, do you think it is competency focused assessment is limited to managerial level? Because I did mention about leadership level, but do you think what has been your experience or so limited to?
Uh, yeah, so that's something that really drives Nine Links for that matter. Just talking about it. So while yes, competency seems like like a buzzword, and of course with a lot of frills associated with it, and of course when we talk about assessments again. So I personally, as in again, I and when I say Nine Links as an organization as well, we believe that competency-based assessments cannot be just limited to a particular level, right? Especially when in certain sectors where the organization pyramid is in such a setup that 70% of the roles are in the lower rung roles, right? So then how can an organization forget those lower rung roles which kind of composite and make up 70% of the organization? So we can't just be talking about 30% of those of that level, which is just managers and the leadership level, which is any which way is quite trained, experienced. So while I'm not definitely saying that it's not relevant, it is definitely relevant because they are the ones who are going to manage the organization or run the organization. So they are definitely the foundation of the organization. But yes, talking about those lower end, lower rung 70%, I think competency based assessments or competency based approaches for various roles becomes very relevant out there as well. So of course, we are at that level. We are not talking about competencies such as strategic orientation or business acumen, but much lesser, maybe customer orientation for a dealer, for a for a sales based role, for a person who's front ending a frontline sales role, or even maybe negotiation skills for a frontline sales guy, or yes, again, coming back to somebody who's working in the BPO segment for that matter, call center agent, right? So customer orientation or even stress management becomes a very critical competency out there. So why not even talk about those competencies, which is what I think also manages the entire structure of the organization, and it does
Hmm.
not deviate from just focusing on those top line leadership level or managers. So I think it has to be across the organization and just not be focused on the uh, let's say the creamy layers of the pyramid, right? So yeah, so not the tip of the organization but deep down into the organization. So that's what I personally believe, again, as a researcher and a practitioner. So I think that's where the cycle comes to closure. So yeah.
Closure.
Sure.
Right. Yeah.
So
So
yeah, yeah.
true.
So one more question, Prachi, since you again come in with that experience of research and academia, and I'm sure you deal with a lot of students as well. Something that we also thought that should be discussing, that in the current times, right? Of course, the times have changed, especially post pandemic. So yeah, so now when recruiters come in, right? What do you think are the top 5 or 7 competencies that recruiters really look at when they are hiring fresh graduates, or maybe MBA grads or freshers for that matter? What do you think?
Oh, that's again a very interesting question, and I am still working on a sort of project is underway as far as these competencies are concerned. But we've got a few first round of set of competencies, actually second round of competencies that we. Along with my colleague, worked on, which is competencies that recruiters are looking for in a fresh MBA graduate, right? So yeah, so uh, see, there are few critical but basic competencies as well, and I'll talk about few something that has emerged in this particular research of ours. So it's like one, when you talk about domain knowledge, that is certainly expected from an MBA graduate. So that is a competency required. Then it's collaboration and teamwork. That again kind of looks like all right, but it is making a lot of so recruiters are looking for that set of competencies. Here what I mean is also something behaviors associated with manage working in the teams and all, right? Because we tend to work in silos a lot sometimes. And third, which is again basic, however critical, is communication. So this has again emerged to be one of the very important competency that recruiters are looking for. And mind you, we are here talking about MBA graduates, but communication is one such skill which is again, so again, top uh, companies who are into completely research and all, so they've also identified communication as a very important deal breaker for even at a leadership level. So this also applies here. Another very important thing, keeping in mind the changing context that you were referring to, is what we found is being future fluent. So that future fluent would mean something who's agile. So adaptability, that is what they look for in a potential candidate. Also resilience. So we were thinking resilience did emerge probably after COVID, but no. But as a fresh MBA graduate, after these interviews that we conducted, resilience and adaptability did emerge, which we nomenclature as being more future fluent, being more futuristic as well. And critical thinking has also emerged as an important competence in the emerging, like, the potential candidates just out of MBA or the management institutes or the institutes. So yeah, this is what I hear. Other than that, there are a few more in terms of something around integrity, things like that. So that also has emerged as. But yeah, we're still, the work is still under process, but these do emerge as very emergent, evident clusters of competencies.
Sure.
Yeah, right. So,
Do you think empathy also has gained momentum, or because we often get feedback from the organizations with whom we work,
ah,
right?
mm,
That they typically look for empathy, especially when we're talking about roles which are very customer centric,
oh, mm,
across levels. So I think
ah.
what is your opinion on that? Is empathy
Yes.
something that has picked up momentum?
Yeah, so this is a competency theme that emerged both as part of collaboration. It did emerge there, and at the same time, it emerged in adaptability. So
Hmm.
you, as one of the cluster, we naming it as adaptability and like being more resilient. But empathy did emerge as one of the sub competency. However, as I said, so the next third round is also there. So it could emerge as a very basic, like a deal breaker. So you need to have that in order to capitalize other set of skill sets. So you don't have empathy, probably you will not be able to capitalize collaborative efforts. So that kind of level is the uh, next level of study, which is we're trying to identify those basic, and then on the top of it the intermediate, and then things like that. But it did
Right.
emerge. It did emerge. It was one of the major themes that emerged.
So I think that's the I would rather say the beauty and challenge of behavioral sciences, that there's a lot of interlinkage and overlap, right? It's very
Yeah.
difficult to decipher on the cause and effect model, what leads to what and what comes first and what happens
Right.
later. So I think
Right.
that's one. I would
Hmm.
rather say one beautiful aspect of behavioral sciences, as well as one challenging aspect, as well as researchers that we can
True.
speak about, right? Okay,
So
perfect.
this is one question that I often get in my executive development programs as well. That if everything is important, then like what do we assess, right? So if empathy is important, if this is important, like you have a list. But that is where again I just like to bring this competence, and the importance of competency is that you're talking about the real deal breakers. If your job requires empathy, then be it. So that becomes your 5 deal breakers. You are looking for, you need to assess that. So that makes their job easy. So here we as a researcher, we think, that there are multiple, aspects to something leading to performance, but organizations also need to identify the real deal breakers, so because deal breakers cannot be 10, deal breakers would be like 5 competency. It could be completely assessed through psychometric assessment, or when you talk about integrity, so you need such psychometric assessments. How do you do that? Some value based assessment as well, and things like that. So we need to identify those deal breakers which would make uh, the whole job and effort more impactful for the both individuals in the organization and the organization as well.
So I think yes, that's what again I think your suggestions and your your whole uh, I would rather say the elaboration of competency based assessments definitely goes in tandem with what we are doing in terms of being very focused towards the clientele that we work with, very focused competency based assessments, right? So definitely not something that we compromise on when we talk about standardized assessments as well. So yes, and of course for our viewers, if you would want to try us out and have a sneak peek into our into our demo tests as well, we'll be happy. Arva could share a link to the free demo test as well, the inquiry form, and we'll be happy to share a free demo test link with you for further for your further insights. So we would be happy with that. Sure.
Yeah, thank you, Nivedita, and thank you, Prachi, for this insightful session. I have a question from the viewer. Pranav says you spoke about competency-based assessments for MSME companies. How relevant or effective can competency-based assessments be for manufacturing MSME industries?
Sure.
Can
So
I, should I go
yeah,
ahead?
the green
Yeah.
specific Karwa, or maybe Prachi could take up this question.
Yeah, what was it directed to
No,
somebody
no,
specific?
anybody can take that up. Yeah, no problem. Not addressed to
Oh,
anyone. You either
okay.
you or
I'll briefly talk about it, and maybe Nivedita, you also mentioned about other sectors, then you can pitch in. So when we talk about even manufacturing sectors, it could be technical competencies. That's fine. So when we talk about competencies, there are behavioral competencies and there are technical competencies. Every job has a set of KSAOs, right, which are applicable for different purposes. That is when we talk about hiring or training, things like that. But the key here is that you identify. See, that is where the impact comes in, where we identify the right competencies, that is in terms of the expectations from people, whether manufacturing sector or no. So there are certain expectations in terms of competencies, so we identify those. Identifying the critical competencies as half job done, and then you using the right tools and reliable and valid tools to assess them. That in this limited period of time, I'm just briefly talking about this. So identification of the right competencies and assessment of them. So irrespective of any sector, every job, every behavior, every performance is linked with knowledge, skill, abilities of people, which is nothing but competence. So you need to address either knowledge, either skill, either behavior, uh, by whatever tool that you will use. Yeah, Nivedita.
Right. No, I think very rightly put, Prachi, that while MSME sector organizations are definitely a little, worry of the cost of the whole exercise. That's the one, so because we work with a lot of MSME organizations for that matter, but apparently it also, you know, means as to how much or for what levels do they want to do that, and also what are the number of tools that they want to assess. I think a whole lot of it goes into it, so it necessarily may not be a very an expensive affair. So of course with a little planning, I'm sure, but yes, of course it's very relevant for MSME sector organizations, especially when I think when they are bringing themselves up, right? So, not to forget even the Tatas or the Villas are once medium scale organizations, and that's where they have scaled up to a certain level altogether. So, I think it's irrespective of the sector or the size of the organization.
Right, right. That competence. Yeah. So one more question. Uh, audible?
Yes, yes, you are.
Srishti asks, how can we customize psychometric tests for the organization without compromising the research validity and reliability?
Right.
Nivedita, I think you should address
Sure.
that. Or
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah. So it actually begins from understanding the various roles and levels that need to be addressed here, right? So again, the organization could have a different organization structure in place, right? So understanding the organization structure, the culture, the value systems, the roles and responsibilities. Of course, when we talk about it, it feels like a very extensive process. But once the process is in place, then yes, once we are very true, very sure that this is what and this is how we want to assess it, using fairly standardized, reliable tools which are readily available. And of course, India again is out there. Well, of course, there are many tests that have been well established by the Western world. But yes, now maybe in the last a decade or so, again, India is out there. Which are like uh, tests developed by Indian researchers and professionals, right? So I think using them, and they are fairly standardized and established. So I think that solves the purpose, which is where this expertise comes in terms of understanding the roles, the responsibilities, and then drawing out, the word that you just mentioned has just, kind of hit me, the deal breaker or the critical competencies that we are talking about. And of course, when the test is customized to suit that purpose, I think it just brings in the right results, the right approach.
Right, right. Srishti, hope your question is answered over here. Do we have any more questions or should we proceed ahead? Yeah, so I think no more questions. It was a really insightful session. We all got to know a lot about how critical competencies are important for the organization. So, okay, thank you all for joining here. Thank you, Nivedita, and thank you, Prachi.
Thank you, Eva.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Kathy, so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good
Thank
night,
you. Bye bye.
everyone. Yeah. Bye. Take care. Yeah.
Take care. Bye bye.